cloud native, SD-WAN, analytics, machine learning, agile development and testing, edge computing, DevOps, service management, enterprise architecture, hybrid IT, neural networks, cybersecurity, serverless, low-code, no-code, big data, integration. You're listening to the Intellex podcast, where we bridge modern and legacy technology and untangle the buzzwords to help business and IT leaders connect the dots to achieve digital transformation. Disclaimer: the perspectives expressed in this show are the independent opinions of the hosts and/or guests and do not necessarily reflect the position of Intellex or any companies mentioned here. And now, your host, Jason English.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Brainwave podcast with Intellex. I'm Jason English, your host. And joining me today is Scott King. He's an application security evangelist from Zimperium. Anyway, thanks for joining me, Scott.
Hey, glad to be here, Jason. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, I thought it was a particularly important time to have you on right now because we've heard a lot about how the COVID crisis has created a need to work from home, and it's driven people to use apps more than ever before, and especially the way that we're leaning so much on the digital side of our ability to do business rather than meeting in person and all those things. So, has the COVID crisis increased the urgency of mobile device security and application security?
I don't know if it increased the urgency, but it definitely increased the need for a couple of different reasons. One, we're supposed to be stuck at home, right, and social distancing. So we're using devices for shopping, for dating, right? No one goes on dates anymore.
Yeah.
For e-commerce, for banking. So we're really depending a lot on our mobile devices. And now we're constantly at home. So you really need to pay attention to, your home network security. And then if you're at home using your home network, you more than likely are logging on to your corporate systems with your home devices in your home network. So there's a lot of variables. But Mobile App Annie, they do a lot of research on mobile usage, and they help mobile app developers develop advertising campaigns and do usage and statistics and things. But they've seen a huge increase in mobile usage, and hence, the criminals are going to follow. So they can subscribe to the same services. So is the need there? Yeah, there's actually more of a need because we're using our devices for more than anything that we ever did before.
Yeah, has your audience and your users seen a spike in malware attacks or other kinds of exploit attempts right now?
Yeah, definitely. So we saw a really big spike in early March to middle of April. And a lot of this malware was resident in the COVID contact tracing apps. So people were starved for information. They downloaded these COVID contact tracing apps to help, alleviate the spread of the coronavirus. But, enterprising hackers or cyber criminals, they put up fake apps and they put malware in there. And the malware can do lots of different things. They could be crypto mining, right? And they can use processing power. They could be data harvesting. They could be doing all types of things. But, if you can grab onto some other need, like an event, like a pandemic, enterprising cyber criminals, the ability for them to actually launch those campaigns versus the ability for corporations to defend against a brand new something like that, there's a big gap, right? So they're just much more nimble.
Right. And it seems like the opportunity cost of launching such attacks keeps going down over time as well. There's very little sunk cost in running a lot of these kinds of attacks. I know that some of them are actually some are more expensive than others. I mean, what are some of the most common techniques you're seeing right now? I've also heard a lot of people talking about the relative cost or the value of such attacks if somebody does find an exploit. What's your perspective on that?
Well, the cost to the cyber criminals varies, right? Because it depends on who is doing this. There are application development organizations that just develop malware, right? So they work it as a full-time job. And you can look at their power usage on the grid, and you see that the staff gets there at 8 and they leave at 5, right? They work it just like a full-time job. But other people that don't have that type of infrastructure, you can just rent the mobile malware, and it's a SaaS product. So it has a subscription cost and it varies, right? So it could be like $2,000, it could be $25,000, depending on what it is. So there's a great bit of variability. And well, the good news is there's a price for everybody. So if you want to spy on mobile devices, you can do it with relatively low skills.
Yeah. So what would be some of the most common techniques that people are, I guess they're renting them or they're downloading them, or what's some of the most common techniques people are using to?
Well, I mean, the most common. So there were fake coronavirus, the contact tracing apps. There were fake apps, right? You download an app, you decompile it because most of the apps are not obfuscated enough to prevent reverse engineering. So they just basically create another app that looks exactly like it. They make it available and then kind of pass it around through your network, right? So this could be SMS, phishing. This could be ad campaigns. You could put fraudulent ads inside of another app. So that's another way. And then the more sophisticated attacks actually exploit the entire device. And this is what we're seeing with the banker malwares. I create an enterprising app, maybe a cryptocurrency converter app, and that contains malware. The malware gets into a device. And then once the malware is inside that device, it basically takes the device over and forces the user to see image overlays instead of real apps. So if I log on to, Royal Bank of Scotland, and it looks like I'm logging in, and then what happens is I'm actually typing my credentials into a different system that the cyber criminal is actually harvesting my data. And then, once they have your username and password, then they try and log on and create a fraudulent transaction. There's data from RSA. So they put out a fraud report first quarter this year that said 25% of fraud on mobile was from a good account. So the account was over 90 days old, but it was a brand new device. So that would really be indicative that you surrendered your credentials, but someone somewhere else is, logging in as you on another device. So, banks and would need to have, a fraud system intelligent enough to get away from, IP spoofing, location spoofing, device tokens, things like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to stay ahead of that, especially when the human behavior on the other end of it seems to be so far behind in general. I think out of all the SMS messages with links and emails with links, there's always going to be 1% to 2% of vulnerable people who will click on those things. Like you have a package waiting or your COVID results are in or something like that, right?
Yeah, the package waiting, that's actually a good one right now because the Postal Service is in the news about mail-in ballots or whatever, right? So, so there's phishing campaigns that has, notices about, hey, your Postal Service has been delayed or whatever. So again, another event, right? But it's basically, if you think about it, it's just like an agile marketing campaign, but it's just, they're not selling products, they're harvesting data.
You recently had a project where you had research teams running testing against 300 different finance and banking apps. Can you talk about that project a little bit? Because I thought it was interesting how you approached that particular market.
Yeah, so basically what we did is we researched, over 1,000 different mobile banking apps from all across the world. In the US, it was about 300, a little bit less. But essentially what we did is we ranked these apps for privacy and security relative to each other. So we put them in a group, and I've got a picture here if you want to see a picture. Here, let me share there it is. So essentially what we've done is we put all of these apps into a mobile application testing platform, and it scans all of these apps for privacy and security. On the left-hand side, those apps need improvement for security. And this is your API keys. This is your obfuscation. This is, any type of app data, right? And then on the vertical axis, this is privacy risk. So this is how invasive is this app to user information. So think about when you download an app and it asks you for certain permissions. I need your location, right? For a mobile banking app, location is important. Maybe I'm looking for, a branch or an ATM when we, used to be able to walk around, right? So that makes sense. Camera, that makes sense too, because, for my app, I can actually take a picture of a check and deposit it. What doesn't make sense is some of these apps have access to calendars. I don't really know why a mobile banking app would need to understand what meetings that I'm in. That's private information. And even geolocation, in California, that is becoming private information because you can track people. So
Right.
that is important. So what we did is we basically said, okay, we take a look at all these apps. These are better for privacy and these are better for security. And in the upper right-hand corner, it's about 30% of the apps are doing a good job. And the lower left-hand corner, about 20% of the apps, they need significant improvement for security and privacy.
Yeah. So what would be an outlier like the one on the lower left? What would be some of the bad conditions that occur there?
So one of the worst apps, and I'm just going to run through some of the findings because there's a lot of them. So there's hundreds of different findings. But one of the worst apps, it has commands to launch another app. So sometimes we see apps inside of apps, and sometimes that makes sense. Think about a helper app for a game. There's no reason that that a mobile banking app should have that. Let's see, this app, it blindly loads all files that come into the system. It accesses the phone call log. So it actually knows not if you're on a call, it knows what numbers you called, the full call log. So it doesn't really make sense to have that. It also can perform a trace route network function. So if you're trying to circumvent any other system by, moving your traffic around, this app actually is tracking you while you're doing that. Let's see, it can capture screenshots. So sometimes that is okay. Sometimes mobile app developers put screenshot information for usability, but it could leak data, right? So especially if I have a private key, if it's an e-wallet app and I've got my private keys and my address is in there, the developer can just take that. That's pretty scary. Location. This app actually stores inline API keys and values in plain text. That is a no-no.
Are you looking at a different screen?
Yes, but I'm reading it. I can't tell you what this is.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it does all kind of stuff. Has access to the camera, connects to an application service. It's pretty invasive, right? So one, it's invasive, and then two, it's not properly secured because there's no obfuscation in this app either.
Well, cool. Yeah, well, that's particularly interesting. I mean, I guess the big lesson to take away from this is that for all of these apps, it's almost like everything is on a need to know and need to do basis, right? Any particular action that app enables that it doesn't really need to do, that's what creates the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about when you download apps, you don't know what all those permissions and what those terms mean. So this goes way beyond tricking somebody with a SMS message. Mm-hmm. SMS message, it's short, right? It's 140 characters and a link. So there's only so much information. But some of the terms for the mobile apps are pages long and purposefully, right? Because what they want to do is they want to be invasive to your device so they can grab all your data. They may not even use it, but they have it. So you need to really be concerned about that because a big majority of people do not read the terms of all those mobile apps and what they do.
And nobody has time for that.
Right. Like, one of the mobile banking apps that we identified had access on iPhones, had access to your health data or your health app. So this is your heart rate, your steps, your pulse ox, I guess, if you have an Apple Watch. The mobile banking app had access to that. It's kind of curious why your bank would need access to how far you walked. So, the developer probably just said, okay, I'm going to get all of the permissions. I don't need them, but I'm just going to use them because probably it's just easier.
Yeah, just grab as much as you can, I guess. Are there any fundamental differences between iOS and Android apps? I mean, it seems like you read the advertising that iOS, Apple always has iOS ads that say, oh, it's a more secure platform. But I'm sure there's a lot more to be gained by hacking iOS apps. What's your impression of that?
Well, I think it depends on who your target is. I mean, both of the operating systems are very, very secure, and they work really hard to make them secure.
Yep.
Android they get talked about more because there's more malware in Android systems. And so there's a lot of reasons, right? It's an open system. iOS, it's a closed system. For iOS malware, a lot of times it's not called malware. We'll find malicious profiles. And it's basically an extra little management profile that comes standard in iOS, and an app will put a profile on there. If they put a profile on your device, they can manipulate that. So we do find a lot of those. On the Android side, since all the apps are public, it's open source software, then it's easier to create malware for that for whatever reason. There's also more global market share for Android. So your target, your pie is bigger, right? So there's just more Android devices. What Android has going for it, though, is how fragmented it is. So some people say that's a bad thing, but the fragmentation is actually like a self-defense, because if I develop an exploit for Android 9.01, it only works on a certain portion, right? But if I develop an iOS exploit, for 13.4, there's a lot of devices on that because a lot of people, update more often because there's not device-specific operating systems. So there's good and bad for both. But essentially, they all use the same internet protocols and communication protocols, and the protocols themselves are vulnerable. Wi-Fi. So logging on to an app at Starbucks, it's just as vulnerable on an iOS device as an Android device.
Wow. Well, it's a fascinating world out there in application security. Thanks for joining me, Scott. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's great talking to you again.
Yeah. Where can our listeners go if they want to perhaps see this report in action or learn more?
We can contact me directly. That's pretty easy. Basically, Google The Scott King, and you'll find me. All of my tags, Twitter and LinkedIn, are The Scott King. There's lots of information on the Zimperium blog, which is blog.zimperium.com. And we keep all of our reports and things like that on the blog.
All right. Well, thanks. Have a good day, everyone. And keep thinking. All right.
Thank you for listening to the Intelix podcast. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, feel free to drop us an email at pr@intelix.com. Until next time, keep on transforming.